So how does it apply and when? Well, IR35 only applies to personal service companies. And the reason I'm making that point is because there will be contractors that you use within your business and contractors who are supplied by agencies who are not personal service company contractors. So anybody who's supplied by an umbrella company is not a personal service company. Anybody who is an agency worker, and that means that they are actually engaged and paid by the agency, is not a personal service company. So I'm just wondering whether it would be helpful for me to just draw a quick diagram. Is everybody familiar with what umbrella companies are in the room? Yes, no? Right, okay. Thank you for... Okay, excuse my... This is a weird pen. Okay, and then let's say we've got TXM, of course, here. Okay, so either you can have an agency worker, okay, so that's where you've got an individual who's engaged and paid by TXM. Actually, I don't think TXM does that, does it? Pardon? Yeah. You do? Okay. So that is one option. Or you've got a PSC. Yeah. And I'm putting these layers in because this is contractually how it works, and that's obviously important for the legal analysis of how the supply works. Or you can have an umbrella company here, which wouldn't be a TXM company. It would be a third party, an independent umbrella company. And what they do is employ lots of contractors, okay, and they're all paid on a PAYE NIC's basis, okay, so they're paid as if they're employees. So the only ones to which IR35 applies, change my pen, are these ones here. Okay. Now, quite often this causes a bit of a confusion, and it's useful to be aware of when you're doing your analysis, because sometimes PSC and umbrella are lumped together as limited company contractors. So in your analysis, you need to try and find out how many of those are PSC, how many are umbrella, and that's obviously important for establishing how many PSCs you've got. You know, what is the size of your challenge here and your risk, but also in terms of implementing your responsibilities as end users, you need to know who you do that in respect of. So does that make sense? You still with me? Yeah. Okay. How do I open a new one? A new document? Down at the bottom. Okay. Okay, right, great. So it applies to PSCs, and it's where there is a supply of labour. So that means whether you are wanting that personal service company contractor to come and work on one of your assignments, your projects. So you want that person, you don't want anybody, you just want that person. So it has to be personal service. And you've got to be a company that is bigger than a small company. So there is an exclusion under the IR35 legislation for small companies, but I am assuming that for most of you in this room that's not going to apply. So that's a company with a turnover of less than 10.2 million a year, or a balance sheet of less than 5.1 million a year, and less than 50 employees. So, you know, that's a reasonably small organisation. So for most end users who would use a recruitment agency, they're going to be within the size limits for IR35. IR35 will apply where you've got those features in place and the circumstances under which the personal service company contractor works with you fails the IR35 test. And that's where we get the terms inside IR35 and outside IR35. If they're inside IR35, that means that the IR35 assessment is that they fall within the rules and they have to be taxed in accordance with IR35. If they are outside IR35, that means that they have been assessed as not falling within the IR35 requirements, and they can continue to be paid on a gross of tax and NI basis. So at the moment, PSCs who have assessed themselves as being outside IR35 are paid either by you, if you engage them direct, or by the recruitment agency on a gross of tax basis. They invoice for the amount that they are entitled to charge you, and you pay them gross of tax. There's no deductions at all. So what is the IR35 test? This is going to be the same as test as it's always been under the sort of old rules, if you like, and the public sector rules. And that is a hypothetical employment test. So what you have to do is disregard the contractual arrangements completely and just imagine that if you had a contract between your organisation and the individual, the contractor, does that have the features of employment? Would that be an employment relationship? Now that sounds as if it should be straightforward. It's not, because there is no black and white test. The employment status test is based on a series of employment case law that stretches back, 100 plus years. There's a lot of it. And obviously we're talking about tax status here, but it's applying employment case law. So it's complicated, it's a bit touchy-feely. There is no black and white way of saying, yes, that person is definitely an employee or that person definitely isn't. But it is looking at a list of different characteristics and forming an overall picture. And if the overall picture is that that person is an employee, then IR35 has to apply. If the overall picture suggests that that person isn't an employee, then they are outside IR35 and they can continue to be paid on a gross of tax basis. So if you've got a significant level of supervision or somebody who is reporting into a line manager, they're quite clearly told what to do, how to do it, when to do it, where to do it, and they are pretty much integrated into your organisation, and they work within teams that sort of work together. They work alongside direct employees who may be doing the same kind of work. Your control test is going to be pointing towards employment. The next one is personal service, and this has always been something that a lot of contractors have focused on in the past, because you may have noticed requests to have rights of substitution in the contracts that you have with agencies and contractors. It is, it's right that if there is a right of substitution in the contract, and it's something that can be sensibly implemented, that would mean that the person was not an employee, because you have to have personal service in an employment relationship. The problem is that a lot of the substitution clauses are an attempt to get around the personal service side of things, and the tribunals are pretty scathing about them. I think it's fair to say that the emphasis on right of substitution has gone down in recent years. The importance of control has been promoted. So this is relevant when you're thinking about, well, how would any of this ever be tested? If it goes into a tax tribunal, these are the things that they would assess, and it would be the tribunal, it would be the courts assessing it, not HMRC. So there is a difference in approach. One's the sort of legal approach, the other is this is what we want it to be approached, that's HMRC. So, but personal service is still relevant, and it's certainly something that is included in a lot of the assessment tests that I'll come on to in a moment, and you'll probably be hearing a lot more about as the day goes on. The third element is mutuality of obligations. So there has to be an obligation both on your part and on the contractor's part to provide and do the work. And it shouldn't go beyond the assignment they've been asked to do. But again, mutuality obligation is a little bit of a grey area. Sometimes it will be have a stronger weighting than others. So I've seen certainly in I think it was the questions that came in from the survey that James did, that what comes up a few times is a reference to a 2-year tenure, 2-year assignment period, and that somehow gives rise to obligations under IR35 or employment. This is relevant to the mutuality of obligations. So there is no 2-year period. That's not relevant here. But the longer a contractor has been working on assignment within your organisation, the more likely mutuality of obligation will start to creep in, because the expectation that they will be there for a longer term becomes the reality, and that's where mutuality of obligation becomes particularly relevant. So I think you can sort of dismiss the 2-year tenure point. I think it's a little bit misleading, but any arrangement that places a contractor with you for a significant length of time is massively going to point towards employment as opposed to non-employment. So it is going to affect the assessment under IR35. So that is the significance of the length of assignment point. And finally, a question of whether or not the way they operate means that they're in business on their own account. So, as a personal service company, they have a company. They're meant to be running a business. And, we know that contractors use PSCs as a matter of convenience, and some take it more seriously than others. But in order to fall outside IR35, they should be showing features of running their own business, and that includes having their own business insurances. Obviously, that's a cost to them, but that's a cost of doing business. So that's something that we're probably going to see being promoted as an issue for personal service company contractors, making sure they've got the right kind of insurance. And obviously, Kingsbridge are here today, and that's something that they can specialise in. So it is a question of looking at all of those features and coming up with an assessment. Is this person more likely to be an employee or not? It doesn't mean that they become an employee for employment law purposes, and that's another thing that came out in the questions. IR35 turns them into a deemed employee for tax purposes only. Okay? It does not turn them into an employee for employment law purposes. So just because somebody is assessed as falling inside IR35, it does not mean that they suddenly get a right to holiday pay. It does not mean that they get a right to be auto-enrolled into a pension scheme. Those do not go with IR35, and actually the guidance that HMRC published to go with this made that very clear. And that's a significant point, because it means that the cost of assessing somebody as being inside IR35 is not necessarily going to lead to you having to fund holiday pay and pensions.